You're at Run the Full Race live stream. You're in the right place. If that's what you're looking for. So we're going to talk about how to connect advocacy and electoral campaigns together, something I've long been passionate about and long just like appreciated the organizations who do that well. So we can talk about a bit of that here today. So I'll do a quick introduction, which is what we're in the middle of now. Then I'll talk about advocacy as kind of a starting point for electoral engagement, what that can look like. And then I'll hand it over to Elizabeth to talk about the kind of unified communications journey and how that can be done effectively for those who are doing electoral campaigns or really folks who are doing any kind of civic engagement work. Oh yeah, sorry, and we will have a Q&A after that. So you're welcome to put questions in the chat, but our plan is to kind of wait till the end to answer those questions. And feel free to chime in on the chat if you have any commentary as well. And Kirit, like, very happy to hear questions then, but also interested if people have ideas or learnings that maybe we don't have as well. So feel free to participate in that way. So yeah, we'll get started here. Real quick, I'm sure many of you are users of New Mode. But for those who don't know, so New Mode is an advocacy and engagement platform that is purpose-built for nonprofits and charities. So that's, our kind of singular focus in what we do. The problem we solve is most advocacy campaigns don't work. So our solution for that is we surround decision makers with targeted high impact campaign actions, or we let our customers and organizations do that. And so, if you're a decision maker, a politician, a corporate CEO, if you're getting emails that are effective and personalized, you're getting letters in local papers, you're getting tagged on social media, you're getting phone calls from your constituents. We know from many of our customers, but also a lot of research that that is what can make an impactful advocacy campaign. That's why we have, $10 a day daycare to a certain degree in Canada. That's why there's been many wins in many countries. Is this kind of campaigning, and this kind of campaigning, and this connects really well to the topic we're on today. It also lets you build community. So if you have someone who has taken all of these actions, they're more likely to stay engaged with you over time. They're more likely to volunteer for canvassing or something like that. They're more likely to vote. And so it's this way of building relationships over time. And again, we focus specifically on like getting people to take these actions, whereas others like Elizabeth and Carl have focused more on the communication side of that. And so why start your get out the vote journey with advocacy? So I think the way to think about this is if GOTV is the moment you need people most, advocacy is how you prepare them to show up. Um, and so a lot of folks who have done this kind of advocacy to GOTV work really well have I think I don't know if all of them know it or not, or some of them some of the organizations that we work with definitely know this is what they're doing, but it's sometimes called the Integrated Voter Engagement Framework. Sounds nerdy. But what that is a year-round political organizing framework that shifts the focus from short-term transactional campaigning to continuous long-term community power building. So it basically integrates the kind of stuff that you might think about with electoral campaign, like voter registration, canvassing, phone banking, w with issue advocacy, leadership development, community organizing. So putting those pieces together rather than seeing them as separate. And so, yeah, to start off, I'll just show some data points that, like why pay attention to this is because it really works, and there's a lot of data to back it up. And I'll show some examples of how folks have done this in a minute. But one example is Mgage, which is a civic organization focused on the Muslim American community. So they embrace this IBA approach. And they've seen a 17.2% increase in voter participation among its base. Another data point, and this one's from the Analyst Institute, specifically focused on kind of long-term multi-tactic advocacy campaigns. So the kind of advocacy that we encourage folks to do. So, making phone calls, getting letters in local papers, that kind of stuff. What they found is in their study was there was a 50% higher propensity to vote from the control group of those who engaged in this kind of long-term advocacy. And so like getting people to call and then later following up with SMS messages on a platform like Call Hub to get people to phone bank or just to like get out to their to vote. So definitely some more data to back that up. And the effects can actually be stronger with low propensity voters, which I know is a focus for a lot of folks now or is seen as an opportunity. In Arkansas, a study found a turnout lift of 19.7 points among functionally inactive voters. So this kind of engagement and advocacy and then electoral work can be even more impactful for those who aren't as engaged in politics, which kind of makes sense, if you can get them engaged on an issue like I don't know, right now there's kind of this movement around data centers, and there's a lot of people who aren't normally maybe engaged in politics. You can get them engaged in something like that, and then transition them over to electoral campaigns that can be quite powerful. In the last nerdy data point, a 10-year longitudinal California study found that $1 per capita invested long-term community power building was associated with up to a 0.31 percentage increase in voter turnout. So yeah, I wanted to start with some data points just because I know this is hard. It's hard work to do. There's a reason why a lot of energy shows up towards the end of electoral campaigns. It's difficult to sustain long-term advocacy and community building, but it does pay off if we can pull it together and do it. And so here's some examples of folks who have kind of made this bridge happen. So Color of Change had a big victory on making calls free between incarcerated people and their loved ones. So they did a successful long-term advocacy campaign, won it, and then in the next election that came up, they transitioned those people who had taken action into a get out the vote. In this case, what I'm showing here on the screen is a vote pledge on that same issue. So that's how they transitioned from one to the other. Another example is Common Cause. So they had people writing letters in local papers around Project 2025. And then you can see they then would follow up with those people, invited them to find their polling place and go and vote. And this can be a powerful combo because letters to the editor they require some depth of engagement, like you have to actually write a story. So it's a higher barrier action. So those folks are much more likely to actually do the next action, which could be, in this case, voting. And this was also close to the election. So there's different ways to think about the kind of advocacy engagement journey. And so definitely like the early part of like just building those initial relationships and growing them over time is part of it. Um, but also there's like a recency benefit to if you engage people kind of during electoral work, if you engage them in advocacy as well, they're going to be more likely to vote. And these things don't compete against each other, like asking for someone to do a phone bank and asking them to write a letter to the editor. It's generally more is more. Like if you get people to do more things, invite them to participate, they're more likely to do the other things you want them to do. Another example I'll show. The Warren Democrats in 2020 ran a 50 state campaign encouraging over 12,000 people to send letters to editors or to contact state officials about voting access. The effort helped keep the issue of safe, accessible voting in the public eye while mobilizing voters across the country. And I'll show a quick video of Elizabeth May inviting her supporters to take one of these advocacy actions, just as an example of like how an electoral candidate can show up with this kind of work, which I would love to see more of.
Everyone should have to choose between voting this November and staying safe from coronavirus. So we're doing something about it right now. And here's how you can help. First, go to elizabethwarren.com/democracy. Then select your state to get started. From there, you'll be able to take action to let your elected officials know that voting safely in our upcoming elections is important to you. Now, whether you're a seasoned caller or letter writer, or this is your first time speaking out, our tools will make it easy. You'll be able to call your governor, secretary of state, and state legislators, or you can call your representative in Congress, or write a letter to the editor to make your voice heard in your community. We'll guide you through every step of the way. Voting is the heartbeat of our democracy, and that's why every American, Democrat, Republican, Independent, every American needs to be able to vote safely. So thanks for taking action, and make sure to tell your friends about it. Together, we can make sure.
So yes, that's a great example of an electoral candidate just mobilizing her supporters to take advocacy actions that connect with their campaign, and then of course the people who do that, they're going to follow up with them, get them to phone bank, get them to canvas, make sure they know where their polling places as well. Um, and yeah, the last example I'll show is I know there's some Canadian organizations on here, so I wanted to show this one. So this is from Abby Lewis, his campaign, successful campaign for the leadership of the NDP, and they had a series of campaigns during that leadership campaign. They had a series of advocacy campaigns, specifically petitions. This one's on grocery gouging, grocery store gouging, and I think they had a bunch, and I think like this one highlights for me the point I was making a little bit earlier about embracing kind of recency. So not kind of, seeing it as like, oh, now we're in electoral mode. Let's shut off our advocacy program. Seeing advocacy as like part of your electoral campaign as well. And so like thinking of like, what can we mobilize people to do that isn't just the phone banking electoral stuff, and it will actually pay off. And there's kind of there's an engagement side of it, but there's also a kind of like identifying what matters to people side of it that can happen at any point. That can happen early on or later. So, if you were going to follow up with someone who had signed this petition, you would be able to know like, oh, this is the issue they care about. So you could give that information to canvassers or to phone bankers, or in your text blasts. You could speak to the issues that they care about most by looking at the actions they had taken in the past. So now I'll shift to advocacy to TV, like kind of a couple specific flows to consider in your next campaign. Then I'll hand it over to Elizabeth. So one is social advocacy to GOTV. So um, as folks might know, Numode has a tactic where you can get your supporters to tag publicly elected representatives or others on social media, on multiple platforms, Blue Sky, Threads, Instagram, etc. Um, and this can be powerful for connecting to GeoTV in a similar way to letters to the editor because what it's doing is, in addition to being like really impactful of like getting in the mentions of decision makers and the fact that we know that staffers pay attention to that. So in addition to it being kind of powerful for policy advocacy, it's also your supporters publicly identifying themselves with a campaign or a cause. And all the kind of research that I've seen shows that when someone publicly identifies with the cause in a public way, they're much more likely to stay engaged over time. They're much more likely to respond to your future calls to action. So it can be quite powerful in that way. And so if you compare the kind of more private advocacy, like sending an email or making a phone call, which can be a good start to a campaign, but it's still, people kind of privately sending a message to looking at this and letter to the editor as kind of now I'm putting my hand up and you can see me identifying with this campaign. I'm identifying as like a part of this issue in this organization or this candidate. Um, the next one I'll show is click to call to get out the vote. Um, click to call, probably people know what that is, but basically a form where you find it finds your representative based on your address, and then the supporter clicks make the call. And there's different ways that this can work with new mode. The supporter's phone rings automatically, and they're connected to their representative there. Um, and there's a couple things that are important about that. One is like there are some tools out there where it just lists a phone number, but then you can't track the data as well. Or you might not even get the supporter's phone number. So it's important to use kind of an automated system. And the reason for that is it's a really ideal setup for a kind of electoral engagement communications flow that you might use something like Call Hub for, where after you can email folks, but you have their phone number now, and so you can text them. You can have them receive phone banking calls. You can invite them to be a phone banker themselves, a volunteer. And since they've already done kind of a volunteer phone action, they're sort of a natural like, oh, okay, I've already called my rep. I can do a phone banking with this organization. So there's a nice kind of smooth transition from doing a click to call advocacy action to doing the kind of electoral mobilization work that you might want to do elsewhere. Um, so yeah, that's it for my section. Keen to hear any questions people have at the end. But now let's learn about the next step in the supporter journey. And I'll hand it off to Elizabeth at CallHub.
Thanks, Steve. Hi, everybody. Just to do a quick intro, my name is Elizabeth. Steve said, I'm an account executive here with Call Hub, and I've had the pleasure of working with numerous state and local campaigns, along with organizing groups and nonprofits, really just helping them move to a unified approach for outreach. And so that's what we're going to be talking about today. Just a quick background on Call Hub as well, in case anyone here isn't familiar with our product. But we are a platform for unified outreach. So really combining all of your digital channels from phone banking, text banking, emails, voice broadcast, relational, and not just hosting them on one tool, but finding ways to make those channels talk to each other so we can be focused on what our voters are saying to us, their responses, and what's important to them as opposed to just what we want to send them. So that's what we're going to look at today. I have some slides for you, and then we'll actually take you through a voter identification workflow and voter persuasion so you can start to envision how it might look at your organization and your campaigns as well. So over the past few years, we've had multiple organizations come to Call Hub with the same problem, that their results weren't exactly what they wanted them to be. And after helping these organizations solve these result-based challenges, we actually realized that the problem was around fragmented outreach instead of just having different tools. So a little bit more about Call Hub. These are all the tools that do lie within our platform and that you could bring into a behavior-driven workflow. When all of your channels are on one tool, you have the ability to customize your workflows so that you can make it based off your entire campaign goal, what your volunteers are capable of, what your volunteers have time for, and then most importantly, what your contacts actually want to hear and listen to. But since it's not just a tools problem, the real hidden problem is fragmented persuasion that can happen. We know that you already have multiple tools for calling, texting, robocalls, emails, relational, ways to opt into your campaign as well. But the hidden problem is that the persuasion can be fragmented, and it causes three main issues. One, a supporter can be treated like a stranger in one channel, but then a supporter in another. Second problem that can happen is that your staff is spending time moving CSVs instead of actually being on the phone or being behind a text message talking to voters. And most importantly, we don't have any way of knowing which combination of touches actually moved someone from being just a contact to actually being a supporter or a voter. And on top of that, time is a huge challenge. If we take even a list size of 20,000 voters and multiply it by 1 minute of friction per contact, that's over 300 hours that your staff or your volunteers have spent fixing CSVs instead of having conversations in the final stretch of your campaign. So for our next step, I actually want to take you through what the voter journey could look like in a behavior-driven workflow. Sorry about that, wrong button. So in order to actually start running unified campaigns, we need to have a way for our channels to not just exist together, but actually talk to each other. Ways for them to know what's happening in the other channels so that they can update each other on what contacts are telling us. So this is what an entire unified journey could look like. A 360-degree view into our voters' journey and automated so that voters are put into certain channels based on the actions that they take with us and the stories that they're telling us. So in order to actually learn how to run behavior-driven workflows, we need to start with a trigger. So in this scenario, our trigger is outreach completed from a call center campaign. In this campaign, my volunteers have already gone through a phone bank and actually had conversations with voters. They talked to them about what issues they care about, what's important to them for this election, why it's important to them. And then my volunteers shared why that issue is also important to my candidate and my campaign. At the end of the conversation, my volunteers can ask the voters, which way are you leaning? Are you a supporter? Are you leaning towards being a supporter? Are you still completely undecided? And based off that question, they're cued into the right channel for them. So, for instance, someone who tells us they're undecided may not actually know enough about our organization or our candidate to engage in another phone banking session or a peer-to-peer text campaign evenly. But what they might engage in is some additional information if we get it to them fast enough. So someone who's tagged as undecided can actually come over here into an issue education campaign that goes out as just a text broadcast. And this will actually have information in the text that the voter had told us they care about in that initial phone bank. So now taking it back, the journey is we talked to them, they told us what's important, and within 5 minutes, they got an education text that directly related to that. Now, if we look at the lean supporters, these are people who are on the fence about, committing their support to us, but they do still need an extra push. These are people who are perfect for a peer-to-peer text campaign. So in this peer-to-peer text campaign, I can initially send out a blast to 67 people who are in this funnel and send them more information on our candidate and the issues they told us as well, but then allow my voters or my volunteers to have real persuasive human conversations with them so that we can actually convince them that they should be a supporter for our candidate instead of just being on the fence. After 1 hour, if they do identify as a supporter, we can actually bring them right into a GOTV contact list where we can then send them another text saying, hey, now that you've identified as a supporter, just letting you know, we'll reach back out to you in November to remind you to go out and vote. And then after that, we can hold off. Because once people identify as supporters, the last thing that we want to do is bombard them with texting and calls and emails at risk of turning them away from our campaign. So same thing you can see over here. Anyone who's tagged as a strong supporter gets immediately put into that GOTV contact list and then receives that same text message, thanking them for their support and telling them that they'll hear from us again in a couple months, 3 weeks, however long it is until the actual election. So with this workflow, we obviously want to automate our voters into certain channels, but we also want to be able to track our goals. So this is the unified goal dashboard that correlates directly to the workflows you're running. You can see that initially we reached out to over 200 contacts, almost 300 actually, and that eventually 186 people had identified that they would support our candidate. And what I specifically wanted to track from this goal dashboard was how someone moved from an undecided voter to a persuaded voter. So we can see that immediately 130 people had identified as undecided. And then we put them into that peer-to-peer campaign where we had live conversations, persuasive conversations with them. And after that, 68 people actually identified as a supporter, but 31 people did need an extra touch. We can see from there that that had a 100% success rate, and after time, 33 people actually identified as a supporter as well. And the best thing about this is that you can actually go in and see all of the criteria around these goals. So the questions they answered, the contacts who ended up in that, and where each campaign did well versus which campaigns may have needed some extra support. Then we can take this and create a contact list so that we know when the time is right to send out another text or an email or a call. And in reflection, the reason we created this is because Call Hub is also a tool and a platform created by voters. We've been on the receiving end of disconnected blasts where we gave our time and possibly a donation to a candidate or an organization. And then we felt that pain of getting a text message 2 weeks later that didn't recognize us as a supporter or a previous donor because we are just part of 2 disconnected blasts. In addition to that, we know that as organizers and volunteers and organizations, we don't have a lot of time. We don't have a lot of resources. We have limited staff and limited volunteers with limited capabilities. And we don't always have the time to be combing through CSVs and lists, looking for a certain tag, then cleaning up a list, exporting it, re-importing it, doing it again. And then on top of that, making sure that everyone is getting the right message at the right time. So with behavior-driven workflows, can not only make sure that everyone is getting the right message, but keeping people engaged throughout the year in combination with advocacy, so like New Mode is running, so that people stay engaged all the time. Now I can kick it back over to Steve. I'm sure we have some questions that are popping up and would love to do answers to any of that and some reflection as well.
Yeah, thanks so much. I love how tangible that was. I was thinking at the beginning of my presentation, it felt a bit airy. So I appreciate you being like, this is how it can specifically work.
Yeah,
Um,
absolutely. And yours was great, Steve.
Thank you. So yeah, we'll open it up to questions. So please put questions in the Q&A if you want, or in the chat. Yeah, and I think I have like a couple of thoughts or questions for Elizabeth myself, and you might have some for me. So we can just make this a kind of discussion part. So the first question that I see from Ryan is how well does click to call actually work in terms of actually having a supporter speak to an elective representative when a supporter typically simply get an assistant rather than an actual decision maker. And I'm just going to share my screen to make sure this is clear because I think some folks are um, more new to this stuff than others. One sec, that's not the right one. Okay, so this is what a click to call campaign can look like on New Mode. There are other platforms that do something similar. Um, and so the elected rep, you'll find the elected rep from an address here, the elected reps in this example. And then if I click make, I won't actually do it, but if I click make the call, it'll connect me to their office in the US on Capitol Hill or constituency offices. Um, and so the question is like, do you get actual elected reps? And the answer is these days definitely not. You're gonna get a staffer. Um, and I think that I'll say at the federal level, that's definitely true. If you're in like, we have lots of campaigns in local areas. And so if you're in like a rural local area, you might actually get the decision maker or their actual voicemail. And like a lot of the wins we see are kind of local campaigns. So want to encourage folks to do that work when you can. But yeah, you will just get a staffer for the most part, and I don't think that's a bad thing because their job is to take the input from constituents and deliver that to a politician, so they know what their constituents are saying, know where there's a high volume of activity, and we know that they definitely. Pay attention to that data, especially on calls, because they know like these are, especially if it's from constituents, these are people who have, actually taken the action of picking up their phone and calling and are willing to talk about this issue. This isn't just signing a petition. These are people who are more deeply engaged. So yeah, the answer to that question is you definitely won't get the politician for the most part. But that's not necessarily a bad thing. You're just at the end of the day, you're just delivering constituent communications, and you're just going through an intermediary. But that's mostly the case in general. Like even with social media, um, you are tagging representatives if you use New Mode's social advocacy tool, and some of them might pay attention to their mentions, but usually it's a staffer that's going to pull in this data and give them a report. And again, that stuff's more powerful when you can show it across multiple channels. So, at New Mode, we've done some research and actually talk with the staffers and the IT departments of different governments and politicians. And one thing they do that I think makes what I would do too is they look at how many people, how many of the constituents are taking action and on which channels, and they combine that data together. And if they see people are acting over time on multiple channels, they pay and plus volume, they pay more attention to that. They also pay more attention to are there like personalized messages or does this look like it's the same message? And so there's different ways to encourage that kind of activity. So it's kind of like we know as advocacy campaigners like what types of actions take more work, like what are higher barrier actions, and what campaigns or what actions like have people publicly identifying themselves. And so do staffers. They know like, oh, if someone wrote a personal letter, that means that like when it comes time for the election, they're going to actually care about this issue then and remember. So you try to think about their point of view, but definitely really good question there. Um, okay, what else do we got here? Do can I find the Q&A? Elizabeth, can you see the
Yeah.
Q&A? There's another question.
The Zoom Q&A?
Yeah.
Yeah, I can see it. And I see another one in here that I was just gonna get to. So it says, can you recommend some successful messages to people who are increasingly wary of submitting their phone numbers and their email addresses? They're seeing a lot of reluctance in this organization specifically, but I think we see that, in our industry across the board, people are a little bit more reluctant with their personal information. And, that's for a multitude of reasons. There's spam callers out there. There are some people, bad actors. Sometimes you get on a list of texting that you actually don't identify with, and you don't want to have that be looped in with texts that are actually important to you, right? From your political beliefs to friends and family and things like that. um, and I think my recommendation to that is kind of piggybacking off of what Steve just said, but really sending out messages to people based on what they're telling you. And so whether that is, gathering from a certain action or a social media post, something that they care about, um, or if it's simply just introducing yourself when you do have someone's phone number or their email address and asking the person what they're interested in hearing and what they're interested in receiving down the line. Something like on Call Hub, for instance, you can send out that initial message and do a survey of, hey, we know we have your phone number now. We want to be respectful with it. What can we send you? What should we send you? What is important to you? And then using that data to, further the outreach. And if that means that you even send that person one text a year, then so be it. But at least it's a text that they want to receive and something that'll actually move someone to further action rather than you have the phone number or you have the email and you're sending out messages and just kind of spraying and praying on if an issue will land with a certain voter or a certain supporter. And that can all be communicated over a phone bank too, if you're trying to receive a phone number or a mobile number from a certain supporter. You can advise your volunteers or your phone bankers to explain that and explain that that's how you personally do your outreach and that you're maybe different than some of the situations they've ended up in before.
Right, yeah, and I think on the kind of advocacy form side of it, um, I also want like the kind of principle there is like ask them, which like we can forget. It's really easy to forget that principle, and like people always feel better when they're asked, what their preferences are and feel like they're being listened to. And then yeah, on the advocacy forum side, if you think your community is particularly wary of what's happening with their data and things like that. You can do things like say explicitly on the form, we will not share your data with third parties. So you can just make that really explicit to people as long as that is true in your case. You can also just say like that just say the words like your data is secure. We treat it securely, like just saying that message to people, just to indicate that that this is something that your organization cares about, and it's certainly something that our Numo cares about with our platform. So it's true in that regard. The other thing I would say is like make it clear that it's that you're like a real organization. So that could be like just making sure you're using the same fonts in your page, just basic stuff like that, in colors, trying to match the page to your organization's color, having your logo really clearly. So just showing that like this is a real thing because people are like thinking about their experience, they're just clicking around on the internet. They're not focusing too much. And if they look at a page and they're like, I don't know what, I can't really figure out what this is. I care about this, but I don't really trust it. Then they're gonna bounce or they're gonna have those questions about their data. And yeah, and I think on that messaging thing, like if it's a concern, like you can try to repeat like a core message, like we treat your data securely, we don't share it with third parties. You could have that on the page, but you could also have it like in your emails, in your PSs, or in your footer, just so that message gets across to your supporter base that their data is safe with you. I
Yeah,
want
and on that same note of repeatability, when you are sending out text messages, there are a lot of features on either an Apple user's phone or an Android user's phone that can both help and hurt your deliverability. And on the help side, we'll talk about more, but continuously introducing yourself in all of your texting campaigns can do numbers for the amount of people who both read and engage and continue to stay on your text campaigns. So I'm sure we've all received messages before where it said, this is maybe Steve in bold when I don't have Steve's number. That's because every time Steve texts me, he says, hey, it's Steve. So even something as little as that can actually help a user or contact's phone recognize who you are and your messaging. And if I receive text messages from new mode and every text says, hey, it's new mode, eventually that'll start to populate in my phone and I can save it as a contact. So I know that new mode's texting me over an organization that I might not recognize or something that might cause an alarm in my brain over, a number that I don't see very often. Um,
Yeah, I wanted to ask you, Elizabeth, is is there like what is the best place for people to start who are maybe they're doing advocacy campaigns and they're newer to the kind of electoral space, or they're just like I don't know which thing is the right thing to focus on. Like would it be kind of following up with broadcast SMS? Would it be phone banking? Do you have any like kind of advice on like the first thing in that flow to kind of take on?
Yeah, absolutely. I think my personal advice for that very first flow is something like a text broadcast or a peer-to-peer campaign if you do have those mobile numbers, because a lot of the outreach that you do is dependent on the time that you can put into it. Um, and we can build out, right, these lovely workflows that try and save us as much time as possible. But at the end of the day, you're still relying on staff and volunteers to have conversations with people. And it's no secret that a phone banking campaign takes, much more time and effort and training than a text campaign would, just because you do have way more automation with texting and you do have time to create the perfect response instead of being on the phone and having to just know that right there and follow a script and things like that. Um, Texting is also, very it encompasses a broad age demographic of volunteers. So people who are, Gen Z or below are obviously very familiar with technology and texting, but even as you get older than that as well, it's very digestible for everybody. And something that I would really think would be beneficial for people to have running in combination with their advocacy campaigns year round is a text to join functionality where you can have a number running throughout the year and even combine it with some of the advocacy campaigns that they would run through New Mode and have people use a certain keyword to opt into your campaigns. And while this traditionally was a pretty expensive and honestly cumbersome approach in the past, there's been a lot of new technology to come out to help people do this with longer numbers and that are significantly less expensive for organizations and allow honestly almost 100% return on investment because for every text that people are opting into, you're gaining someone who genuinely wants to be on your list. And you can immediately start controlling that narrative too with a thank you message, introducing your organization, introducing what your data and your privacy policies, and having control on that supporter's journey with you through text. So that's just such a wonderful way to start growing your list because we know that it is getting increasingly harder over time as people do get more skeptical about their phone numbers and their data and their privacy.
Right. Cool. I'll do a final call out for any questions that people have, and then I have another one for you, Elizabeth, on uh, donations. So I didn't talk a lot about that. Like New Mode has some donation capabilities, and of course, like um, people who take advocacy actions are, they're more likely to canvass, or more likely to phone bank, all these things, to respond to text messages. They're also more likely to donate. And so, some people will use New Mode to have a donation form right after an action, and people will, an impressive amount of people will just donate right there and become a donor. Is there, um, is there a flow in HubSpot that people can use to send text messages to encourage people to donate too? Is that a thing?
Yeah, so I mean, similarly, we do have text to donate features where like we were just talking about the text to join, you can also have them opt in to receive a donor form. So if from that, original advocacy form they fell out, they were also prompted to text donate to a certain number. That's an immediate form that can go out or a link that you can send out to a potential donor and encourage them to give to the campaign. And then again, you do start tracking those people and opting them into lists as well. So that's list of donors is already there. And you know that you can then put them into a nurturing fundraising funnel where they are asked to donate, followed up on, and you can see things like a link click. You can check your fundraising platform to see if they had actually completed that form and filled out the donation. And if they hadn't, put the people who clicked the link but didn't donate into one campaign versus the people who did donate into a thank you campaign, and then continue to nurture them just as a donor and make sure that they feel heard and feel seen and they're thanked properly because, you know, times are tough for everybody. And if someone can even spare $1 to one of our campaigns or organizations, like that person does deserve to be recognized for that give. And um, you can, once you have that list from the advocacy, you can really create your fundraising journey however you want.
Cool. Yeah. Thanking people. Like, it's such an easy thing to forget, and
Mhm.
so important. And yeah, with a tool like Call Hub, it's an easier thing to do than
Yeah.
maybe in the past. It's this kind of principle of like recognizing people. Like everyone wants to be recognized for their action, even if it's a digital action. And people remember that.
Yeah, absolutely. And going back to your point before, people want to be heard, people want to be listened to, they want to be thanked. people are so passionate these days and they just want to make sure that we understand that they are and that we know that and we're recognizing it. And so whether it's a thank you or just follow up that's actually has to do with what they told you, that all has such a large impact on outreach in general. And that actually poses a question that I wanted to ask you, Steve. With advocacy running year round, where is the shift between, focusing from advocacy and then starting some of the GOTV
Yeah, so I think advocacy it's like as soon as you can because long-term advocacy is the most impactful for policy change. And the longer you can spend time building these relationships, the deeper they'll be when you want people to do things like Canvas or phone bank or text banking. And in terms of and I think like priming people early, like you see this with Indivisible and People's Action and others, but priming people with messaging early that like, hey, we're gonna be calling upon you to do electoral things. Like that's part of our theory of change. That's part of what we do here as a community. So I think early in your communications flow after they take an advocacy action and in your newsletters, just letting people know that that's part of your mission, that's part of what you do, and you're kind of like setting the expectation that
process?
like, hey, if you're part of this community, we're expecting you to show up with this other part that's really important, which is electoral campaigns for some groups that there can be like a back and flow that happens quite a bit for those who engage in things like primaries and things like that. For others, they'll just focus on the advocacy stuff until there's a big electoral moment. And in terms of like advocacy, I definitely would slow down the focus in the last couple months. But I would make sure there are some advocacy asks every couple weeks leading up to the election, because again, like m more is more. Like if you ask people to do these advocacy actions during the election, then you're top of mind, and it's not like it feels like a very different channel to people, I think. And that's what we've kind of seen in the data. So, they're getting repeated like electoral stuff, and they've categorized that. And if you're inviting them to take an advocacy action, then that feels different. And then it's just
Hmm.
another way to keep people engaged. And if there's recency in their action, they're more likely to do the next thing you want them to do. And I see there's another question here for a small community municipal campaigns with relatively low resources. What would you recommend as the most effective entry point for these tools? And I'll answer that for the new mode side and then see what you have to say, Elizabeth. So I think for advocacy, I would just start with a email your representative campaign. You could there, Numo's not the only platform for us, or for this, but you could use Numo for that. There's self-serve and low cost options for that, and happy to chat with you if cost is a barrier. Um, and I say email because it's pretty easy to, or it's very easy to set up in new mode. And it's targeted, so it's actually delivering a message to some sort of representative or some sort of target. And these days, this isn't a new thing, but it's an increasing thing where people want to know, like, what is the theory of change behind this, and are reluctant to sign like symbolic kind of statement petitions. Um, and so an email action is easy to do for you. It's easy for the supporter to do as a first action, but it's also meaningful enough that people want to do it because it's actually targeted and going somewhere. So That's what I would say on the kind of advocacy side. But yeah, Elizabeth, what would you say to that question on like
Yeah.
yeah.
I think similarly to that, if you're running those advocacy campaigns, something that's really beneficial for smaller campaigns or having relatively, limited resources is focusing on a list that may be pre-segmented. So out of that advocacy campaign you ran where you asked people to email a representative, taking that chunk of people who actually took that action and then sending them just a text message saying, again, thank you. Explaining why that was so important, and then eventually asking for an additional action from those people as well. Because that's really the best way to make the most use of the limited time you have, the limited resources, whether that's monetary or not. Um, and really just make sure that you can at least turn out the people who are already engaged and already align with you instead of spending time doing that more spray and pray method where you're just casting a wide net. Really focusing in is a good way to just make the most use of the things that you have at your disposal.
Great. Yeah, well, we're just about at time here, so
Steve,
uh
I think we did have one more question in the chat. Sorry not to interrupt you. Around the new mode um, movement builder. Do you want to
sure.
talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah, well, they're asking, I see that now. Yeah, they're asking how we can integrate new mode in Call Hub, which I love that question.
Yeah.
And like at which pricing plan, there's w ways to do it on lower pricing plans if you want a kind of direct connection by an API, then yeah, that would be at the
Mhm.
level plan. But I'll reach out to Kevin after
Kevin.
and yeah, see if there's a way to facilitate it if cost is an issue there, because we definitely want to. This is exactly what we want to see people do, kind of combine these two pieces into a unified
Mhm.
journey. So yeah, if there's technical limitations, I'm sure we can get through that. And so yeah, Elizabeth, is there anything you wanted to say before I wrap this up?
Yeah, I'm happy to join that conversation with you and Kevin as well. But just wanted to say thank you everyone so much for attending and participating. This has been a really great time just chatting with all of you and you as well, Steve. Excited to see where we're going to take all these strategies for the end of this year.
Yeah. And yeah, thanks so much, Elizabeth, for your part. I feel like I took a bunch of notes because I was
Me too. Me too.
um, quite a bit there. And yeah, I wanted to just let everyone know that we'll share a recording of the video. If people want the slides, we can share that as well. And if you have any other questions that show up, feel free to reach out to just respond to the email where we send those materials. And I think for both us and I know folks at Call Hub, we're here to help,
Mhm.
and really grateful for folks just spending the time with us, and learning with us on this. And good luck with your campaigns. The world needs you.
Yeah.
And have a good rest of your day.
Thank you, everybody.
Bye.